This is a war on religion. This is a war on the children. They give you the cure with the sickness. This is a war on tradition. This is a war on religion. This is a war on the children. They give you the cure with the sickness. This is a war. This is a war.
All right. Welcome in, everybody, to the LT360 Holistic Health Show, where we are here to get you healthy at a cellular level while we nurture you, the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. I am the coach, Scott Oatsvall, the spiritual health ranger. We're coming to you live, long and strong, and bound to get the friction on. We have got a show today that's going to light you up. We're going to kick the tires and light the fires. We got two guys coming on today. Listen, I've been wanting to get these guys on our show for so long, and I am stoked. I am so excited to bring them on. But again, we want to talk to you about holistic healthcare. If you are in the business of getting yourself healthy at the cellular level, I want to encourage you right now. Check us out online at lt360.com. That's lt360.com. Give us a call, 615-815-0390. If you're looking for all natural health care, if you're looking for non-pharmaceutical healthcare strategies, get you off these medications, keep you out of the hospitals so that you can be everything that God has created you to be, so you can be healthy, happy, and whole. Guys, I'm telling you, put your seatbelt on today. We have got two incredible guys coming on the show with us today. We're going to dive into the world of the fringe creatures. That's right, the fringe creatures. And I'm going to invite all of you to join me on this journey through the mysteries of exploring the unknown. And it's going to have a biblical tone and a biblical perspective to us. Our paths are going to cross in all kinds of crosswinds today. And we're going to talk about Bigfoot, ancient giants, the Nephilim, maybe some alternative history, some sightings of unproven beings. So buckle up as we seek some deeper answers to the questions that shroud these mysteries and phenomenon. We got Luke Rogers and Nate Henry today, and they're here to guide us through the tapestry of the unseen, known as the blurry verse. Help me welcome into Zone 360, Luke Rogers and Nate Henry. Come on, somebody.
Let's go. Need a crowd cheer.
Dude,
Crowd
any
noise.
intro where you're sort of summarizing and directly quoting Sir Mix-a-Lot, Scott, is it's a heck of a start, man. That is
You gotta have it. I knew you guys were going to catch me on that little reference right there. You're too sharp not to catch me on the reference. Well, welcome to the show, Nate and Luke. It is a privilege and a pleasure to have you guys on the show. Listen, before you even get started, I told you what one of my goals were today. So I have created for you my own little intro for you. You can do with it as you will, but check this out. They came from out of nowhere and went to somewhere, and now they are listening everywhere to the Blurry Boys at blurrycreatures.com. Come on, somebody.
Dude, I love that. Listen, like when I was
amazing.
in college, Scott, when I was in college, I worked at a Christian radio station, Y105, Chico, California. Both Nate and I are from Northern California.
Yes.
And we used to cut those kind of promos. Shout out, Y105 doesn't even exist anymore, but shout out to the former Y105. We used to cut those with all of our artists and be like, hey,
Yes.
you know, I'm Carmen, and you're listening to Y105. Remember old Carmen? R.I.P.
Oh, yeah.
But,
All right. Well, Luke and Nate, you guys have done incredible work. I want to give you a chance to really open up with kind of your story a little bit and how your podcast, Blurry Creatures, is blowing up now. I heard about you guys some years ago, or maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when you guys, I think, were just getting started. A friend of mine had sent me something that you guys were doing, maybe with, I can't remember if it was L.A. Marzulli or Dr. Jared Burton. I can't remember exactly who it was, but that got me just really tuned into what you guys were doing. But for our listening audience that may not be familiar with your work, why don't you kind of just give a little brief description, Luke, you and Nate, of what you're doing now, who you are, and kind of how you came about the Blurry Creatures podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we started with Bigfoot. You know, we have like an 80s vibe on our show. Luke and I we had a bunch of mutual friends. We kind of knew of each other, and we both had podcasts back in the day. And I had an idea in 2019 to start a podcast that was about Bigfoot, but more trying to get answers to these questions, because there's a lot of podcasts out there like Coast to Coast and, you know, Sasquatch Chronicles and all these podcasts out there that talk about the weird creatures. But, you know, a lot of it just stays weird and it stays mysterious and it doesn't really have any answers to it. Well, I was remodeling houses, working on, just some projects, and the podcasts and weird stories would kind of keep me entertained as I was doing drywall and painting and all that other stuff that, it's not very fun. You need your brain going. So started hearing theologians come on shows and talk about the Nephilim. And, I grew up in the church, and Luke and I were church kids, and I went to Christian school even, and worked in youth group, worked at summer camp. Campus Crusade. I was in all the Christian circles, and nobody ever talked about the Nephilim. So when people started saying that Bigfoot might be there's some relation, I was just like, wait a minute. So, I had like 6 or 7 years of listening to Bigfoot stories, trying to figure out what it is. And like anybody in these spaces, your paradigm has to grow, because the stories get weirder and stranger, and you can't just put these things in one box. And so there was talk of hybrids, and this creature has some paranormal abilities. And then my mind was like ready for the Genesis 6 stuff and sort of the alternate history and all the things of, the L.A. Marzulis and the Tim Alberinos and all the guys who've been hammering home that there were giants in the lands back in the day. There were seed wars going on. It all kind of started with this Bigfoot journey. And Luke and I, in the beginning, started interviewing experts on Bigfoot. And then it shifted to the giants and sort of the hybrids of the ancient days. So that's so we started in 2019. Now we are over 200 episodes. We took a trip to Peru last year. We threw a conference. Everything's kind of exploded. The Blurryverse has gotten way more than two of us can handle. Luke and I are pulling our hair out sometimes because emails and just overwhelmed with people who love and hate the show. And if you're doing something worth doing, you're going to get both. So that's kind of where we are with the podcast. And it's been a wild ride.
And I think what, one of the things that we set out to do was just to have fun. And Nate and I just like to learn. So as he said, I had a podcast before we did this, and he had one as well. And we might have been retired, and so did his. And it was right before 2020 happened, and we were, 2020 happened like it's an event, but it was, and we just did this thing where we're like, hey, this idea that kind of Bigfoot is the gateway drug. And as Nate said, there's so many stories about this creature, and it's funny to kind of start there, but that's where we started, right? Because it's so weird, because you have the most cited cryptid, in the world, and yet they don't pull a body out of the woods, and then half the stories you get are really odd, like it's what the Bigfoot community calls woo, right? There where things, they disappear or before right in front of your eyes, or you have sort of what we consider maybe a supernatural experience around one of these creatures. And so as we started down that path, I think our first 9 or 10 episodes were just Bigfoot related. As he said, you get into this, as Christians, we want to look at all the things paranormal, what the world calls paranormal. But we want to do it through a biblical lens, because I think one of the things that Nate really coined in our journey, and I think as good as the church itself really doesn't do a great job of addressing what the world calls paranormal. And of course, that, just like every other moniker or term, they threw a lot of dirt on that, and it has some sort of connotations to it. But really, paranormal is just something that is outside of our realm of normality, right? So the church doesn't really the Western church especially hasn't done a great job of addressing that. And then the paranormal community, people that are talking about telling stories, trying to uncover what are these things, really hasn't, in our experience, hadn't looked at any of this stuff through a biblical worldview. And so as Christians, how are we meant to sort of contextualize these things?
The knife was too good. That's the only explanation I have for what happened next. They thought I was a psycho. No, really. After placing my 7th order for the same knife, I got an email from the company.
Things, right? And that led us to things like you talked about on our pre-roll, Chuck Missler, right? Chuck was banging this drum long before we came along. And then there's the forerunners in this space, the L.A. Marzulis, the Timothy Alberinos, the Dr. Judd Burtons, these Ali Sadadan, these guys have been doing it. And what we ended up doing inevitably is, because this was a journey podcast, we started getting into the giants, and you get into the giants, you start getting into, of course, Genesis 6 event. And then you have this things, as we talked about pre-roll, that you don't hear about necessarily, right? So there was an angelic mixing of DNA, and then you have this, and that's what the church believed up until Constantine sort of wanted to change that. Like, in the 300, 400 AD. So this is what the church believed for thousands. A church, or this is what followers of Yahweh and then followers of Jesus believed up in Christians up until really the Roman Catholic Church, time of the 400s, 300, 400s. And so why is that now not the preferred view? That these things are all things that we want to address. And then, of course, because we started when we started, we've really hit a wild time. If you've been paying attention and 2020 didn't wake you up to what's going on behind the scenes, what things are being manipulated, and then you get into this last year in 2023 where we had House oversight committees talking about UAPs, which is just a way to rebrand the UFOs, right? This idea of disclosure, right? Like we have military whistleblowers, and we talked about fighter pilots. You talk about guys like David Grush, who just was set before a committee talking about recovered craft. And so if you're a Christian, how are you meant to sort of contextualize all this stuff? How are you meant to put forces in your paradigm? Because by and large, and this is going to be a broad brush, because some pastors and some churches do a great job of addressing these things, and we've spoken to a lot of these people, either on our show or just sort of correspondence. But by and large, I think the Western Church has not done a great job of equipping Christians or addressing topics like aliens and topics like or even just topics like biblical giants, which is in our Bible. And yet we as Christians believe in the most supernatural faith. We believe in a resurrected Christ that was immaculately conceived, born of a virgin, it died and raised again 3 days after. It was the embodiment of fully God and fully man. You have these things that then you go to the Old Testament, we have giants and talking donkeys, and you have, of course, Genesis 3, which I know you're finishing or finished your book on the seed war. That's really where the prophecy of the seed war begins. So all these things, I think, really came to the surface as Nate and I sort of just blazed this trail, talking to people that had done the 10,000 hours. And it's funny, Scott, to be on a show and then talking like these guys are doing X, Y, Z. I think we think of ourselves just as people that interview the experts, right? We try to find those people that have spent the 10,000 hours and written the books and done the academic work, done the field work, and talking about the things that they've discovered. And then what and because we're free speech absolutionists, like we let people present their cases. And, sometimes maybe you're like, I don't know, that's far fetched for me. And other times you go, yeah, I can get that. But I really feel like as Christians, we're supposed to, spit out the bones. And so what we're really trying to do is provide a space for people to discuss, think about, talk about the weird stuff, but then contextualize it within our faith. Because I think a lot of Christians, there's a knee-jerk reaction to sort of throw anything out that's sort of on the fringes, right? But
yeah, which I think is why Bigfoot is such a good starting point, because he's the most seen. We can't even tell you how many times people come on our show to talk about something else and they'll have a Bigfoot story. Yeah. It's so prevalent out there. So this is like the weirdest thing that seems to be in modern times, something that's tangible. You can start there. You can go, okay, this thing is seen by so many people, men, women, children, military, you name it. People see this creature. And then so you kind of lay out the case of there's a hierarchy of weird stuff and creatures. And so we can work backwards from Bigfoot in a way and go, okay, if this thing's still going on today, let's see what else is out there. And any blurry creature out there, we talk about it on the show. So Bigfoot's always
and blurry creatures in of itself, Scott, is a joke. I mean, we have an 80s theme. We don't take ourselves very seriously. We try to provide some levity to really dark subjects, but our whole name is based upon a Mitch Hedberg joke about how maybe Bigfoot's just blurry, and how terrifying is that there's a blurry creature running around in the woods, because no one can ever get a clear photo, right? So that's the approach. We like to engage and have a good time, but even when we're talking about very serious theological and real issues that are happening, across the world.
But
so
blurry also just because there's not a lot of this is conjecture. There's like little fragments of information, and you kind of got to piece it together. So it's blurry photos are a thing, and videos all the time we get sent to us. But the whole space is hard to make sense of sometimes, because you get little verses, or you get little pieces of data that seem to suggest tips of the iceberg of a way bigger narrative and a way bigger phenomena that's happening, like especially with the UFO stuff happening right now. We get little videos and we get little testimonies, but we know based on the people we've interviewed, this is like there's a highway of beings traveling in and out of our world. Where they come from, we don't know. Why they're here, we don't know. Which side are they on, we don't know. But we have this little evidence that, man, so it's blurry in that sense that we're starting to see that the world isn't what we've been told it is. And so there's a lot there. I think it was we accurately named the show because
No doubt.
it just gets
No doubt.
stranger.
Well, I was going to flip the script on you guys, and I was
Go
going
ahead.
to
All right.
there's no right or wrong answer, but what's your thoughts on Bigfoot? But you've already answered a lot of that. But what I'm amazed at how you guys have been able to create, it's really in my way of looking at it, a safe space for people that are curious but not sure, and then they can ask themselves some questions and they can dig further in themselves. But what you guys have done uniquely, I think, in this space is that you've taken this idea of the supernatural and the cosmic wars and the DNA wars and all the things that are in the unseen realm, and you filtered it with some incredible guests, but you filtered it really with a biblical worldview. Mm-hmm. And I really think that one of the most important things that you guys, and Luke, you've heard me tell you this before, and I've texted you this many times, that I really think you guys are doing kingdom work. I mean, you're the tip of the spear for a lost generation of people that really have no touch point to the supernatural. And they know there's something there. They can't understand quantum physics. They can't articulate what the laws of thermodynamics are, but they know there's something in the unseen realm, and the church is not doing an adequate job to fill in those gaps. In fact, like we talked about on air, my formal Bible training, we had no really touch point to the supernatural. And it was all about the alternative views. And like you said, the early church fathers and the early historians, and you look at the Mesopotamians, and you look at the Romans, the Greeks, and the Persians, they all had the same story. And it was a supernatural story. And they had no problem understanding the supernatural. But then you get into post 5th century, and then you see all of the changes starting to happen. And what I appreciate most about you guys is your openness, your transparency, the humor that God has given you to really, really kind of ease that tension that most people come into the topics like this with. And so here's the question for you. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for this incredible podcast that I believe has really, because the veil is becoming thinner and thinner. Right. And so again, I think it was one of your guests that said, all of these sightings of Bigfoot, if one person is right, it breaks the whole paradigm.
Mike
so
Eisner.
again, you think about just looking at what you guys are doing. Nate, Luke, any one of you guys can weigh in on this, but what have you learned? Now you're 200 episodes into the Blurry Creatures podcast. You've got this incredible following. You've done an event already here in, I think it was Franklin or Nashville. And now you're setting back going, okay, what's next? You're into 2024. Where do you think the Lord has taken the podcast? Maybe give us some things that you've learned.
Japanese knives are modern-day samurai swords. One knife can glide through a bluefin tuna, chop fruits and vegetables, or just about anything.
And then where do you think the podcast is going from here?
Oh, that's a great question.
That's a good question. Larry King. All right.
I think somewhat, early on in the show, I don't think we knew. We're kind of more in the back seat and just seeing what happened. We brought on some guests who changed the sort of the trajectory of the show itself. I think, like Luke said earlier, we're just here to learn. I think we've learned that the kingdom of darkness mimics heaven a lot, and there are a lot of dark entities, and there's a hierarchy of creatures on both sides. And really, I think sometimes Christians will limit, there's just demons out there. And that's really what we're up against. But I think there's a whole lot more. And, when you start to understand the list of characters, I think you can go back and read some of these, especially biblical stories, and go, man, what was really going on back then? What were they really up against? And why are there so many cataclysms? And it feels like the Bible is this highlight of strange stories, right? And I think the modern person has a tendency to just read those as sort of a myth, or the way that the ancients sort of wrote things. They lived in sort of a Lord of the Rings world, and we don't now, right? The world is not Lord of the Rings like the Bible sometimes feels like it is. And I think Luke and I have learned that all this stuff never went away. People are still seeing giants. I mean, they're still seeing them all over, like in remote parts of the world. That history has always sort of been rewritten and retold. And if you look into it more, you find that people were finding giant skeletons. People are seeing the things that are supposedly not here anymore. That that the ancients, that the more of the story is that knowledge was lost. That there was a time when knowledge was beyond our anything we can imagine, and slowly we've been losing it. And I think we've been trying to redo what the ancients did so naturally with this more electronic human version of what the ancients seemed to do, and it just oozed out of them. They could communicate in ways that we can understand. They could build structures that we have no idea. And we learned that in Peru on our trip. So it's sort of a hodgepodge of all that, and coming to realize that there is no real difference between the old world and the new world, in the sense that, weird stuff still happens. Some of these craft are ancient. They have technology that's beyond our imagination. It was present in the Bible times. It's present today. There are alien beings, non-human entities messing with humanity since the beginning. And I think we have this tendency to compartmentalize the New Testament and the Old Testament, and perhaps something with the Holy Spirit kind of changed the way they operate. But for the most part, I think I've learned that it's always been strange. This whole story is strange. There's so many weird elements to it, but that makes it more interesting. It, like, the fabric of reality is not boring. The story of God and humanity is not boring. There's nothing boring about it. In fact, the more you start to dive into the stuff that you're so inclined to reject, the more alive the story becomes. And so I think, packaging this podcast in sort of an 80s fun vibe has brought a lot of people in with doubts, and who've been burned by the church, but didn't give up on their faith. They just didn't understand corporate Christianity, or, they were a youth pastor. They got fired. They got into the business of the church, but they always had a relationship with God. And I think the nice thing about a podcast is just two guys asking questions. There is no hierarchy of structure. We don't have a board and elders. We can talk about whatever we want. And, you can tune in or you can turn it off. And you can't really cancel a podcast, So I think that format has allowed people to ask some really good questions. And I think that has allowed Luke and I to hear some things that we would have never heard in a church setting, just because people would be like ushered out, like, you are nuts, get out of here. But, you hear rumblings of today of kids going missing and child trafficking. And then you start looking at these topics and you realize, wow, this child trafficking thing is beyond 3 dimensions. It's not just humans taking other humans. There's a lot of entities involved in taking humans. And we brought on guys like David Paulides, who break it down with the evidence of saying, look, here's the data. This is the scientific data. I'm an ex-cop, and I'm doing this like how the administration would do it. We look at the facts.
411, right? The missing
411. Missing 411. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's not just, why does this stuff matter? Well, people are being taken, and you can scientifically prove they're being taken.
Yes.
No animal, no bear, nothing in this realm is involved in some of these disappearances. Not all of them. Some of them are normal cases, but he doesn't, some of these guys that are doing this, they don't look at your typical case. They look at the anomalies. He's got like 1,000 cases that he looks at and says, look, nothing about these 1,000 cases makes any sense. People are just vanishing. They're going from our realm to somewhere else, or they're being taken on something that we don't understand. So I think that's what I've learned, is that it's like the way the ancients viewed the world and the cosmos has always been the most correct. And we've kind of been put into this matrix of, we think we're so rational. We think everything weird is not possible. And even just a story of a UFO blows some people's minds. But yet, the phenomenon has been going on for, this week we just released an episode on Roswell and what went on back then. And it's not a new thing, And if Bob Lazar is telling the truth, some of these craft that they found are ancient. So, man, I mean, we have a lot to unpack, but I think that's that's what I've learned is that, you know, we've changed the way we view everything in the last couple hundred years, and in some ways for the worse. You know, we're so skeptical now. So,
well, you think about Dr. David Jacobs, and Luke, I want you to weigh in on this, but you think about Dr. Jacobs, a former colleague of mine, and he was, I believe his last stint was Rutgers University, I believe, but he's probably interviewed more alien abductee and the abductee phenomenon than anybody in probably the world that I know of. And it's always the same story. It's always they're being taken. They're always getting genetic material extracted from them. There's got to be a larger plan than this, and just people going on missing in the woods and getting eaten by a bear or by a lion or whatever. And Nate, you bring up the UFO, and Luke, I know you're read into this some, and I want you to weigh in on this. When you think about, was it July 26th of this past year when the Congress met that hosted the hearing on the unidentified aerial phenomenons? And you think this event brought so much light and revelations, and these guys, these whistleblowers, like you said, you mentioned David Grush, but there was also Ryan Graves and David Fravor. And they stood. Now, it's one thing for you and I to get on a podcast with each other and just opine and talk about our feelings and what we think and what our experiences is. But it's a whole nother world to get in front of Congress and under oath testify to a gripping truth that there are alien craft and that are defying the laws of physics, and they're going outside the envelope of known gravity that we know of. And they're among us, and the government is holding this in dark secrets. So again, as you think about that, what are your thoughts on how do we deal with this as a body of believers, as an ecclesia, as a church? How do we deal with this when we're never going to hear this in the pulpit?
Yeah, I think that's honestly like kind of where we are, right? Like I think providing a platform. What you talked about, the whistleblowers, right? The only reason we have this situation, I've said on the show a few times, is because of what happened with Ed Snowden, right? I mean, he blows the whistle on the NSA for spying on Americans, but there are no legal channels, right, for these people to do this without being essentially outed, like whether you be Snowden or Assange, and you got to be somewhere else, right? Now there is, and not to mention these guys sacrificed a ton. They're sacrificing their pensions, their any sort of forward momentum they would have had in the military, to tell us the truth. And so when people start saying that the government, they don't believe this stuff because the government is saying it, you got to go, no,
the knife was too good. That's the only explanation I have for what happened next. They thought I was a psycho. No, really. After placing my seventh order...
The government's not saying that at all. In fact, NASA and the government's official statements is that there's no evidence of any of this stuff. It's the whistleblowers coming out and saying the American people need to know what's going on, and at their own peril. And I think in the same way Nate mentioned Bob Lazar, some of the safest place to be if you're someone who has knowledge like that is to be public, right? And I think that's what these guys are kind of weighing as well. Like, I know stuff that gets people disappeared, and perhaps my best place I can hide is in plain sight in the public eye. So, and this kind of goes back to your original question before. I think what this show has really become and grown to me is that it's become a place where I think people that think about these things or are curious about these things or have had their own encounter. Sometimes I feel like there's an undercurrent in Christianity that says that disqualifies you. Maybe you've had an experience, you've had an alien experience yourself, or a UFO experience, or you've had some sort of creature experience that's disqualifying. Like, you can't be a Christian and also believe that actually happened. And what I think that this show's kind of done is, at least for me and sort of my view, is it's qualified that and saying, no, this box is a big box. Like, it can fit in here. You know why? Because all the answers that we need are in our faith are in the Bible. And if you believe that the Bible is God's inspired word and the arbitration of truth, then you don't need to look farther than places like Gen 6 and some of the supernatural things there to say this can all be contextualized. And what I think has been shocking about this, and let's talk about moving forward, is that this has allowed people to, I mean, the emails that we get, on a weekly basis are, this is maybe fall in love with reading my Bible again. This has made me feel like I have a place to be in this faith again, or this has brought me back to my faith, or this has brought me to Christ. And you go, this is so crazy, because Nate and I this is never anything we intended to do or went out to do. But I think for me personally, moving forward, like, the big motivator is saying that, like, these blurry things that you may have experienced personally, or that you are trying to understand and contextualize the things that are happening around us in 2023, for example, with you were talking about house oversight. Like, we can contextualize this through our Bible. This holds up. Our faith holds up. Not only that, there are answers in the biblical narrative. And I think it's one of those things that unlocks a lot of this too, right? You go, wait a minute. So we have this angelic mixing of races, and now we've got chimeras and we have giants. There's, as you're writing about, there's a seed war. So since the very beginning, there was this initiative to breed out humanity. Talk about the days of Noah and the flood, right? To remove a line for the Messiah, to remove humanity. And what I think some of the things in this space do is it really unlocks the Bible and brings it to life. It becomes the onion. You get all these different depths to say, oh, this makes sense why this happened. This is why Jesus went to Mount Hermon. This is why Christ was intentional about the cosmic geography of the things he was doing as well, because these meant things in that realm, if you will. And so I think our heart is always, and this has always been it, is to talk about these things and to contextualize the weird stuff from a biblical worldview. And honestly, people will encounter the gospel when they do, right? And they do. Because the minute you open up your Bible and that becomes real and you say, hey, there's answers to a lot of this in here. And
Jesus is doing some dynamic things, going to places, saying some really, and when you step back and you realize, man, this is the warrior king from heaven coming down and saying, I'm the King of Kings. I'm wiping all this out. You leave going, dang, it's so epic. It's such an epic story. And there's all these characters involved that we can't see. Whether that's a frequency that we are lowered to, it could just all be right there, but we just can't perceive it. But when you start to see the hierarchy of beings and how epic the story is, then you start to go, I can believe these weird stories. I can believe this person who said, man, this thing happened to me, and it's bizarre, Scott. It's like Hat Man showing up, grazed in people's rooms, being taken through windows in spacecraft, finding themselves missing pregnancies, being on a gurney in a science fiction spacecraft with other people, all this wild stuff that people say happens to them. People come on our show and say, this alien gave me a green vial of stuff and I drank it. And I had health problems the rest of my life. And I had a twin sister and she didn't have any health problems. And it doesn't make any sense. What's that?
Sounds like the vaccine. But anyway, we'll move on.
Yeah, from that. Exactly. No, exactly. But
in all that, Nate, though, I think the one thing that Scott said earlier, I think it's important, is right. You can dismiss all of it and say all of them are lying. But I think what Heiser said, what you said, is that if just one of those is true, if one of those stories is true, it causes to bust the paradigm, and you have to say, how do I fit this in the fences I've built around my faith and around what I find as reality and plausible? And I think that's where we're at, saying like that not everyone's lying. Not everyone can be lying. Not everything is in the same way, because we end up in some of the conspiratorial stuff. Not everything's a conspiracy. Not everything's a psyop. There's not a devil under every rock. But you've got to be discerning. And again, if one is true, then you've got to find a way to make that fit, because it isn't disqualifying of our faith. And as I said before, I do believe it's qualifying.
Yeah, it's true. I think.
Yeah. Yes. All
right, Luke, I want to shift gears. I want to ask a question, because one of the things we talk about on our show is the Nephilim spirit that's in the earth. A lot of people think that the giants were only here on the days of antiquity and that they only walked the earth in the biblical time. And I believe that is completely false. In fact, I believe they are still here today. They're still they're ruling the earth today with our global governance, the titans of global governance, the sports, the arts, the entertainment. You look at big tech, you look at big pharma, big ag, everything is all together. And you think about the Nephilim spirit, that spirit of the Nephilim. What was the spirit of the Nephilim? To defile and destroy the human genome, to destroy the human family, to take people further and further away from God. And because they hate us, why? We're made in the likeness and the image of God. But most importantly, they tried to thwart the very first prophecy in the Bible in Genesis 3, which was that the seed of the woman would crush his head. And so when you think about that, Nate, you've been talking about this, and Luke, I'm gonna let you tee off on this first. You're talking about non-human entities here now. We're not talking about, people that are in the satanic cult and the Illuminati and people that are kidnapping and child trafficking, which is all real. And we've had some people on our show that have really exposed that from time to time. But perhaps even more astonishing than the claims of UFOs and UAPs from that congressional hearing was the claim that we are communicating, and we are not only communicating, Luke, but we are collaborating with these non-human entities. And the testimonies that came out of that are just mind-blowing. But what they do is they suggest that the contact with these intelligent beings are from beyond our planet. And they're leading to this exchange of information and advanced technologies And we're looking at the days of Noah. In fact, Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man be. The problem, I believe, is that we don't have a touch point on what the days of Noah were all about. We think we're the most advanced civilization that's ever walked the planet, and we still can't figure out how the pyramids were built. What is your thoughts when people think about, because again, if you look at just I did a Google search on what the number one search was on the History Channel, and it was ancient aliens.
Yeah.
But what if you change that to one word? What if you said, change it from ancient aliens to ancient angels?
Correct.
How would that change the paradigm? And what is your thought on extraterrestrial and, out of, we're talking about portals now, we're talking about getting into different dimensions. But have you had some time to think about what that really means as it relates to a biblical worldview?
Yeah, I mean, a ton. I mean, we're 200 plus episodes into this, so there's been a lot of thought that goes into that, Scott. I think the first problem with a lot of that is as we address that is semantics, right? There's a lot of baggage attached to things like the UFO and to extraterrestrial, and really, by definition, extraterrestrial just means not of Earth,
off planet,
right? So it's not of Earth, and we're the only sentient creature of Earth. This is the way the Bible talks about it. It's humanity, right?
That's
so
right.
And I think, interestingly enough, we don't know a ton. The Bible doesn't tell us a ton about angels. In fact, angel just means messenger, and if you get into things like watchers, these are just job titles, right? We don't get a ton of insight into, how many different types are there and what do they look like? And I mean, the idea is that they look a lot like us because we have angels that walk into Sodom. We know that, and we have the angel of the Lord shows up and wrestles with Jacob and eats with Abraham, right? So there's some similarities, but I think we can get. I think the problem is a lot of times we contextualize.
Did you know there's a 2-ingredient recipe that's threatening Big Pharma's billion-dollar profits because it can fight dementia in just a few weeks?
These things in ways that aren't really in line with the biblical understanding, right? You talk about Nephilim, for example. Demons are by definition the disembodied spirit of Nephilim, right? So these hybrid creatures that had angelic fathers and were ruling the earth pre-flood by really as proxy rulers. They're just human enough to rule on behalf of their fathers who are angels, who can't rule here because Paul says we'll judge angels here. This is as our friend Timothy Alberino famously says, this is our dominion here. This is our space that God has given us as governance and gave it to Adam at the very beginning, right? So I think our understanding has to sort of expand on what's extraterrestrial, and then even heaven, right? I think maybe this is where my growth has really gone. Like the idea that the way we talk about heaven is there's walls and roads and buildings and if you talk about manna, this is one thing that kind of blew my mind. We just on one of our shows we talked about manna and sort of reverse engineering that, right? The bread of heaven is given to the Israelites in the desert. So how do you make bread? Well, you got to have ground. You got to have grain, right? And then you bake it. There's a process, right? Unless you just want to believe like poof, this is what happens, and poof, there's bread, and poof, angels take human form, poof, which is what a lot of the church does. It's called the poof, sort of the poof theory. If you don't really want to buy that, you go, okay, well then there's probably a physicality to all this because the spirit realm is different than I think this is the problem. Some with UFOs as well, right? We have non-human biologics. Okay, how does that work? If our explanation, and that's what the church, a lot of the church and Christians, not going to harp on the church, but the Christians will say is that it's all demons. They go, well, demons are disembodied spirits by definition. So what does a spirit need a craft to fly in? That doesn't even make any sense.
No.
Right? There's no physicality to it, right? So, and you can't have biologics from a spirit. These things don't add up. So what we then have to sort of hold in our other hand is perhaps in this realm, if we want to use the term realm, and in heaven, there's a physicality, and we don't really know enough about sort of the kingdom phylum of what we call angels, which is Greek for messenger, what that really means, right? We've got a lot of prophetic iconography, like in the books of the prophets, right, and even in Revelation as well. You've got all these eyes and wings and stuff like that. But we know a lot of that prophecy is symbolism, right? So they fly and they're watching. So we can take that at face value, and that's fine as well, and say they're covered in eyes and they're all these wings, or we can take it as prophetic iconography and say that just means that they fly and they're watching. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think where I've grown in thinking about this is this actually has to be a physicality. So how do we account for that, right? If this is all spiritual, and then ships don't crash, that's a physical thing. There aren't biologics. That's a physical thing. So we got to figure out how that works. And you talk about portals and dimensionality. That is one way that would seem to work. But I think when you talk about ancient aliens, people are looking for answers, and because of the proliferation of science fiction and everything, it's much easier or approachable for people to believe that, oh, this is just alien stuff. And they've hijacked a lot of the Babylonian, Mesopotamian, and Sumerian pantheons of gods and some of that stuff to tweak it to make it seem like these aliens, and some of the Graham Hancock stuff too, these aliens have come and done XYZ. It's just really a bait and switch in my mind. These are angels. We know that if, in the book of Enoch, for example, you have there is an expose on Genesis 6. You have these angels that are doing these watchers that descend to Mount Hermon and are doing all these things and taking wives as women, and this is physical stuff, right? And I think that's where my line of thinking has gone. Is like we have to sort of justify the two, and I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't think about it in the terms you said, swapping out sort of alien for angel. And that's, as a Christian, that's where I'm landing. But now, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. We can only guess at. We're not going to really know any of this stuff. It's kind of like it's the Bigfoot paradigm, right? Until someone pulls a body out and you're looking at it, there's a lot of answers that we don't have.
Yeah.
But I think the idea, there's a lot of precedents, Daniel 9 and 10. Yeah. The angel coming to give Daniel the word from the Lord gets held up by the prince of Persia. Now, if angels are just ethereal and spirit, it would just show up, right, in theory, in Daniel's room, but it has to travel. So angels are going to walk into Sodom. There's a lot of this physicality, at least in our realm, that is required. That sort of seems like they got to follow a lot of the physics or a lot of the laws in this space. Now, physics is a whole other thing. Right? We talk about the F-18 stuff. The physics is a whole other thing as far as the advancement of the technology.
Christians believe in more.
Hey,
more
let me ask you a question. I want to shift gears. I got a specific question for you.
All right.
Luke brought up some really, really good points. The first one is that obviously God has some natural laws, and we have to abide by that. He's outside of space, time, and matter, so it doesn't apply to him. But from an earthly perspective, we have to abide by some natural laws that God has established in the order of His creation. Now, the first thing is, like Luke said, is that to operate legally in the earth, you have to have a body. We know that from just kind of the scriptural, the layout of the altars and the layout of just the legal ramifications of God's laws. You said that the giants were disembodied, or the Nephilim were
the demons.
The demons were the disembodied spirits of the giants.
Right.
So legally, again, they have to have a body to operate in the earth, and I think that's where possession and
exactly,
kind of expression happens many times, because they're looking for a body to really operate in the legal realm. So the question I have for you, Nate, as you've looked at this, as you've kind of studied this, as you have these guests and incredible men and women of faith and power and really, really smart intellects, do you think, obviously I still believe and hold fast that the giants are still in the land today. Now, they may not look like the 35 and 45 footers of the Old Testament, according to the book of Numbers and according to the book of Deuteronomy. The Bible says that they were as big as the cedars of Lebanon, and that we look like when Joshua and Caleb went to spy out the land of Canaan, they said we look like grasshoppers in their eyes. So I don't think God's in the business of telling tall tales. I may be wrong on this, but I believe that He was describing the actual height. And the cedars of Lebanon start at 35 feet. So if we're being conservative and saying, let's just say that they did get to 35 feet, these giants, what do you think they look like today? If the giants are still here today, what are they looking like today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously these are just like secondhand stories that we've heard. A lot of people will say, there's something other than Sasquatch out in the woods. People will have like rare run-ins with things that come out of the ground. There was a TikTok guy that just went viral in Oregon and said there's a rock opened up and he saw something looking at him out of this. And then all of a sudden, all these people went up there and tried to find, is this a doorway to the underworld? Are these things underground? And then we have this mythology of like Lord of the Rings, the orcs and all these giant beings live underground. And I think they do. I think they've gone underground. I mean, what we talk about a lot on our show is that like, there were giant skeleton museums. There was one in Catalina Island. There was one in Lovelock, Nevada, and there's several in Peru. You can see, these things not too long ago. But I think as sort of, technology has exploded, people can share ideas. These things cause problems for a lot of the academic narrative, so they got to make them go away. But we talk a lot about sort of the Smithsonian showing up and stealing the skeletons and the bones that were found in America. I mean, you're talking thousands of farmers are digging up giant skeletons. Some of them are 18 feet, 19 feet. Not too long ago, these things were 20 feet, and that's a big dude. So, and then if you go back, look even further, they find these coffins and they find stuff that's even larger than that. So I think they push to remote places of the world like Solomon Islands, maybe like swamps. Some people still see them. Yeah, in Afghanistan, cave systems. So places where I think they knew they were, I don't think they had the blessing to be here, is what we say sometimes. And so they were hunted. They were killed off. People knew these things. Either they didn't have souls and they were just like, parasites in the land, and they just, or, they didn't have the breath of life in them. But they had, kind of a couple.
Join ICE with bonuses up to $50,000 and generous benefits. Join.ice.gov.
Couple parts of what a human has. And so, some people speculate that, they were going to be breeded out and killed off. But yeah, so I don't know.
We've had guys on the show. We've had guys on the show from Afghanistan that talk about seeing them in therms.
Yeah.
Smaller, I think, right? Because if we look at the biblical narrative, Scott, you've got Goliath and his 4 brothers. You have King Og of Bashan, the giants after the flood, and you go, they weren't as big. We have the measurements of Goliath, for example, right? It's not the same.
L.A. Marzulli said that that all the giants had different traits and they had different names. They were the loud ones, or some of them have elongated skulls. Some of them I think look just like 8 foot, 9 foot tall, just pristine humans. They were like a more of an angelic figure with just pristine, super smart, and sort of the men of renown, so to speak, that the Bible talks about. So I think you got a gamut. I think just like any other species, you get a variety of weird, but they all are classified as a giant. I think that seems to be the case, that you had evidence of Cyclops. They say the Cyclopean architecture. Sure. Maybe there was a type of giant that was really good at building something. He just had that big old eye. He just focused on those rocks, and
that explains how
them away.
Right? Well, one of the things that I love about you guys is because people have often asked me is that, what's the big deal? It's not a salvation issue. What's the big deal about Genesis 6, seed wars, the giants? Who cares? And really, it becomes a salvation issue, in my opinion, because what it does is it opens up your whole Bible now to everybody. And the people that that can't understand the Old Testament, and they didn't understand why. I had a great story that happened to me that I wanted to share with you guys, and I'm going to give you guys the last word as we close up. We've got about 9 minutes left. When I was a young Christian in the early 90s, I had one of my friends who I played football with at San Diego State. And
let's go, Aztecs, baby.
Let's go to Aztecs, making a comeback.
Let's go.
But and I had a very, very dear friend of mine. He was a self-proclaimed atheist, probably more agnostic, but he claimed he was an atheist. And he said, "Do you really believe that God is merciful?" And I said, "Yeah, God is merciful. God is love." And he said, "Well, tell me why he would tell the people in the Old Testament to kill the women, kill the children, kill the men, kill the animals, wipe out whole tribes of people, whole people groups." Mm-hmm. And I had no answer for that. I'm like, yeah, that really doesn't sound like a merciful God to me. Right. But had I known that the people groups that he was telling, Jacob's mighty men and David's mighty men and Abraham and all the Genesis 11 and all that whole story, he was wiping out hybrids. He was wiping out the Nephilim. There's 36 tribes of giants in the Bible. Now, we don't call them tribes of giants because in our English version, they don't say these are a tribe of giants. But when you look at the Septuagint and even going back into the ancient writings, especially the ancient Hebrew, you see that these were all tribes of giants, right? Stemming from the land of Canaan. And so that would have made a whole lot more sense if I would have said, you know what? God wasn't killing people. He was protecting people. He was protecting humanity. He was wiping out the bloodline that was destroying and defiling the human genome and the very creation that he put on the earth to glorify him. So had I had that information, it would have been so much easier for me to witness. And now what I realize is once I understood that, It opened up the whole Old Testament to me.
Yeah.
It opened up the Bible to me. I understood Old Testament prophecy. I certainly wouldn't have had a grip on what was coming in the future if I didn't understand Old Testament Genesis 6. So as you think about that, as you think about where God is leading you into 2024, I'm going to give you guys the last word. What's the word of hope? What's the casting vision that you want people to hear from Blurry Creatures? What's the main purpose and why you why you're existing?
You want to go, Luke, or
Go ahead, Nate. I'll follow you.
yeah? I mean, I feel like what you just said will lead into what I want to say here is that when you have context, when you see, we watch sometimes the last 10 minutes of a movie and we try to make sense of it and we don't understand what the heck's going on. When we just read the Gospels, you don't really understand the whole story of why Christ needed to come, where he came from, who he came to, who he came through. You don't know. So you don't really have a salvation that penetrates your heart and you understand what you're getting involved in. Christ is the King of Kings who's predestined to come from the beginning of time to save humanity and usher us into the future. So there's so much more that's promised. We are all eternal beings. We're going to all live forever. This is a snapshot of a huge story that we're living in. It's a little tiny frame. And I think that when you draw back and you get all the characters involved and you see the story from 10,000 feet, you can't help but be inspired and know that God's going to come back, set this world straight, and then he's going to do it through his son. And we can trust that because, the world's getting darker. Things are coming out. Politics seems crazy. I mean, the world is chaotic right now. It is in sheer chaos. You can't make sense of anything. Miami Mall incident. Nobody knows what happened down there. Thousands of cops come and say, oh, kids are shooting off fireworks. Nobody knows. Nobody can tell what the heck is going on. So we know that Satan is the father of chaos, but we know that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. So I think we can have confidence that the peace comes even in the chaos with putting our trust in Christ. And when you know what he did, and when you see the story, I think you just have more trust in that and more trust in your commitment to him and what he's going to do and provide for you. So that's kind of what I hope our show inspires. And even though it gets dark sometimes, we're just trying to give people context to understand what you're being saved from. It's not just to spook you out and freak you out. It's like, dude, Satan has some crazy creative deceptions. And imagine what human beings can invent. Imagine what he can invent and all of his friends can invent. It gets pretty wild. So when you get a little bit of that context, I think you get inspired.
Absolutely. What say you, Luke?
I do think we try to end a lot of our shows, and unironically, Scott, that with some hope, right? And I think that it's always a good reminder for me when we go down these trails that we are in a world at war. We were born into a world at war, and this is an ancient war. And the hope is the promise of God, and it is the victory of Christ. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we walk through our life with our eyes closed and we just try to shut out a lot of these things. I mean, are these, as you said before, are these salvation issues? No, but does it not enrich your understanding of the world around you and the understanding of the Bible and the work of Christ? And if it becomes an epic, as Nate said, if you watch, I like your analogy, Nate. If you watch the last 10 minutes of Braveheart, it's the most depressing movie you'll ever see, right? It's just him getting quartered, which is brutal. I don't know why I picked that one, but it was my favorite movies as a high school kid. I think I watched Braveheart my junior year probably like 40 times. Didn't stop watching the end, right? But that's what you watch. You don't really understand the context of, you understand it happened. And if that's Christ, you understand his work on the cross, you're still saved. But I think the big picture is important too, right? Understanding that because we're in a world at war, some of the things you talk about, right? We're in the seed war. There is a very real war and an adversary, an enemy that's hell bent, and I use those words intentionally, on the destruction of humanity. Because the story of the Bible is God had a family, and man broke that, and God redeemed humanity back into His family through Jesus Christ, and I think there's no accident then that we see the things we see: the assault on our health, the assault on the nuclear family, The assault on information are the assault on the truth, right? These are all nothing is new under the sun. These are all ancient tactics and ancient lies that are being repackaged and remarketed to our generation. And so I think a bit of what I would hope is that our show opens people's eyes so they see a lot more of the context of the war around them. And in that contextually be reminded that the end's written and that Christ has won, and we stand in that victory, we walk in that victory, and we bear the image of our King, and we can walk in that power. Doesn't mean things are going to be rosy and great, and everyone's going to get.
In too many cities, dangerous illegals walk free as police are forced to stand down. Join ICE and help us catch the
rich and have mansions and those things that are promised to the servants of the enemy, honestly, right? But Christ did promise us life and life to the full, John 10:10, and said that we can experience that in following him. And I mean, that's the hope, right? Is that I hope we are able to provide context for people to understand their own experiences in the world around them through the lens of the Bible and through the idea that we are in this cosmic, physical, this real and cosmic war that surrounds us, but we've already had victory. So that's always the hope, right?
Let everybody know how they can reach you, how they can support you. Let them know the best way to get a hold of you.
Yeah, blurrycreatures.com is our website. You can read all about us. You can actually listen to episodes there. We are on every podcast platform that there is. So if you listen to podcasts, you can find us there. You can find us on YouTube. Although not all our episodes are uploaded there. We're a little slow on the old uptake there, but we're catching up. And we do a whole lot of things. Nate said we've got trips. We have conferences. We'll have another conference this year. We've got some things cooking where you can engage with what we do and the things that we are producing. So check us out there, Scott. Thanks for the opportunity to be on your show, man.
Yeah. You guys are awesome. I love you guys. Love what you're doing. And just keep serving the King. Hang on real quick. I'm going to pull you out, and we're going to close the show. But I want to talk with you just real quick before we leave today. Yeah. You guys, listen, thanks for joining us today. It's been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to have Nate and Luke with us. Remember, knowledge is power, curiosity leads, and understanding unites. Until next time, God bless you guys. Take care. We'll see you soon.